Who knows more about sport utilities than anybody else? You might be surprised. That's this week on Motoring 99.
TSN's Motoring 99 is brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas Car Care, the way it should be.
The beautiful Rocky Mountains in British Columbia are the backdrop for this week's edition of Motoring 99. Hello, everybody. You know, our first story is not quite as old as these mountains, but we do go back 30 years. That's when Suzuki made plans to produce a lightweight, compact 4x4, later to be known as a sport utility. One of the more popular ones exported to North America was the Sidekick. Well, then along came Honda and Toyota, who thought, maybe we can make some money in this market. And so we saw the birth of the CR-V and the Toyota RAV4. Well, last year, 3,500 Sidekicks were sold in this country. You ready for this? 16,000 were sold of CR-Vs. So how does Suzuki feel? I mean, they've sustained this market for years. Well, the way they looked at it, they had a decision to make. Either they throw in the towel or they fight back. The decision was unanimous. Suzuki would not abandon the market it created. It would fight back, go head-to-head with Honda and Toyota, and the new Grand Vitara would lead the assault.
Now it was time for a major change, and they came along and they sort of ate our lunch because they had some good product out there, and we could not really fight back with the Sidekick. So that's when this unit came into place about 2-3 years ago. They started designing it, and this is a really important vehicle for us because, as you know, the Sidekick had been around for 10 years, and it was time for a major change. And time has come, and I think we've taken the lead with this one, with the V6 unit that we introduced, and 5-passenger, 5 seat belts, which we never had before. So we've come a long way with this one. And it's going to be very important for us for our future sales here in Canada and also in the United States.
Although the Grand Vitara will be imported from Japan, the Vitara convertible will be built in Ingersoll, Ontario, replacing the Sidekick. You looked at the competition.
Yes.
What did you say you had to do to beat them?
What we had to do, we had to come out with a bigger motor, more power, and that's what we got with the V6. And that's going to be a big plus for us, and that's the competition. And also what we had to look at very seriously now is with the 5-passenger, 5 seat belts. So competition told us we needed that, so now we've got it.
Although Suzuki offers a choice of 3 engines, the 24-valve, 2.5-liter V6 is what puts the Vitara in front of its 4-cylinder rivals. It revs smoothly and pumps out 155 horsepower and 160 pound-feet of torque at 4,000 RPM. Off-road capability is impressive. In fact, the Vitara has to be the quietest and most comfortable truck they've ever built.
Are you at the bottom of Outhouse Hill?
At the top of Outhouse Hill.
Okay, so you can flip them around if you want.
I think it's going to be kind of great to see a small player in the market shake things up. I think with the V6, and they're keeping it to themselves for at least the foreseeable future, I think they're going to rattle that cage a fair amount. Quite frankly, refinement, and that's not a word I would previously have associated with the Suzuki 4x4. The level of refinement, especially with the 6, the new platform frame and everything, that's a very solid little vehicle.
Well, they've started right. I mean, they've got a vehicle that is very competitive. And the pricing is very competitive, and so those 2 things are right. So there's a lot depending upon their marketing, how it's done, and how that's perceived. They've got some hangover mistakes to overcome. And
Like what?
the Samurai, for instance, people still remember that, and this is certainly no Sidekick. It's infinitely better than the Sidekick, which was infinitely better than Samurai. It's a really good vehicle. I came prepared to doubt their ability to bring out a good vehicle, and they've certainly done it.
I would definitely be worried if I was Subaru with the Forester, the Toyota RAV4, or Honda CR-V. Again, I think the V6 is the big difference. It has some power.
They talk a lot about image in this business to the consumer. Is that their biggest challenge now?
I think so. I think the product will speak for itself if they can get people in it. The thing is to get people to forget the old Suzuki, the old standby 4x4 of 10, 15 years ago, and try this new one.
Who doesn't make a four-wheel drive or sport utility vehicle will be making one for sure in the year 2000, 2001. So the market will continue to grow. And Toyota really had them RAV4 and the Honda. They've had big numbers. Their sales have been tremendous in there. But we're back into the market right now. We're going to come back fighting with this new V6.
From the beginning, they numbered each project as they came along. So as it happens, this car was 356 in the chain of designs. And that's how the name came around.
The interior packaging has but two minor foibles. First of all, foibles.
Okay.
You know, the first Odyssey was far too small to be thought of as a minivan, yet much too big to be a wagon. Well, welcome to the second generation Odyssey. Now, this is a vehicle that's going to turn the minivan market on its ear.
The rework of the Odyssey started with the body. When compared to the original, the new van is twice as strong in bending and 1.5 times better in torsional rigidity. Not only does this newfound rigidity cut down on the usual rattles and squeaks, it gives the suspension a good base of operations. Up front, the Odyssey features McPherson struts and a roll bar, while the rear adopts a modified version of Honda's double wishbone design. In the pylon test, the Odyssey flew. Despite its size and tall stance, there is very little in the way of body roll, and understeer is benign.
The only problem? The steering, as with every other Honda I've ever test driven, is just too light, which gives you a vague on-center feel. If they addressed that, they would have a truly outstanding dynamic package.
Power for the new van comes from a 3.5-litre single overhead cam V6 that is, to coin a phrase, the cat's meow. Thanks to Honda's VTEC variable valve timing, you have access to 210 horses and 229 pounds-feet of torque, 90% of which is available from just 2,000 RPM. The result is a van that feels like a sports car. Tromp the gas pedal at any speed and the response is superb. Matched with this engine is a 4-speed automatic with lockup. Normally I wouldn't mention the lockup, except that Honda use it in both 3rd and 4th gears, which gives you access to 6 different ratios and some semblance of engine braking.
My only complaint with the automatic transmission is that it's far too easy to select D3. What you end up doing is burning far more gasoline than you really need to. There needs to be a better detent between 4 and 3.
Stopping power comes from a disc drum design that comes with standard anti-lock. As well as featuring 3 channels and 4 sensors, it features electronic brake distribution. This limits the amount of brake effort sent to the rear brakes, which in turn improves stability at the threshold. For the record, I required 118 feet to stop from 80k.
The interior has been well thought through with 2 exceptions. If you do fold the rear seat away, you can only accommodate 4 passengers. If you're unlucky enough to get a flat, the full-size tyre will not fit in the wheel well. Not a problem unless you're fully loaded. The rear seat on this Odyssey is, as Honda call it, truly magic. Pop the headrests out the way. Fold the seat back down, quick tug on that strap. The whole lot folds into a well in the floor. With the centre seats removed, you can now accommodate a full 4x8 sheet with the tailgate closed. It's one of the few that can accomplish that. Now, in order to get the 4x8 sheet in, they had to rethink the rear suspension and get rid of the shock tower intrusions. Yes, it's still double wishbone, but it's very compact. But that's not where the magic ends. Fold the seat up, and when it comes time for that tailgate party, you have, as they say, got it made in the shade. You know, Honda have transformed the odd to the outstanding, and if it wasn't for production capacity limitations at the Alliston, Ontario plant, this vehicle would become the best seller in North America. As it stands, it's going to be a wake-up call for many of its competition.
Time to update our long-term Volkswagen Passat. Unlike its predecessor, the word stunning could be used to describe the new Passat's exterior skin. Built on a stretched Audi A4 platform, the new Passat is a couple of inches longer and has more headroom than the old model. Our test car is powered by a 150 horsepower, 1.8-liter turbocharged four-banger. It delivers a smooth and quiet ride, and we haven't noticed any evidence of turbo lag. Now, the Passat is also available with a 190 horsepower V6. Although the Beetle has been grabbing all the headlines, the Passat has been delivering where it counts in the showroom, with sales up 110%.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns the emergency brake or parking brake assembly. In addition to being able to stop your car in an emergency situation or holding it when parked on a hill, it's also equally important that the emergency brake release fully. Here's a quick test to make sure that it does. First of all, position your vehicle on a slight gradient, and with the steering wheel straight ahead and all four tires properly inflated, the vehicle should roll away rather easily with the grade. Now try the same thing after applying the emergency brake. You can see that when I apply and release this one, it rolls away quite easily. If it doesn't, you've confirmed the fact that your emergency brake is dragging or not releasing properly. That can be caused by corrosion on the brake cables or the rear brake mechanism. In either case, it's something that'll overheat the rear brakes if they're dragging and dramatically shorten their life. That's your Midas tip of the week.
You know me, I've always been a middle-of-the-road kind of guy. Some surprising revelations coming up later on Kenzie's Corner.
I got involved in my enthusiasm for Porsches in, around 1960, I suppose, and as soon as I could, pretty much, I bought one.
And so the love affair began between Dan Proudfoot and his 1963 356, the first vehicle to carry the Porsche nameplate, and one of only 70,000 ever built.
I loved Volkswagens as a kid, and then imagine the pleasure of discovering that the man who designed the Volkswagen was also responsible, or his people at least, were responsible for a supercar. And what caught my imagination, first of all, they look great. To my mind, they look better than any other car. But also, they were incredibly efficient, and I thought it was remarkable that this car could go 80 miles per hour and get 30 miles per gallon. So I thought that this was a car that had everything. It had looks, it had efficiency, it had comfort, a true grand touring car.
In the Canadian newspaper business, Proudfoot is a household name. While Dan writes for the Toronto Sun, his brother Jim is one of Canada's most respected sports columnists.
One thing we can agree on, he didn't influence me in cars, because brother Jim has never driven and has no interest in cars. With me, I think my dad's enthusiasm for cars rubbed off, and that's where it started. But with my brother as the model, Jim is 12 years older than me, and his career as a sports writer was coming right along when I was a teenager, and these were things that interested me too, so it certainly was a model for me. The only thing wrong with Driver Source, in my opinion, is we should have done it years earlier. It's a section every Sunday. We've had car reviews that I've done since '78, so it goes way back, but it was just a page in the paper, and now we have a proper section. It's very good for news and what's going on in the industry, and of course the reviews are the finest. This is the only new car I ever bought, actually. I got it as soon as I got a job at the Toronto Telegram back in '66, and liked it, and however within 2 years it was showing rust, and I thought, what's the point? I never got another new car after that. I traded it in on the Porsche, which I thought was a fantastic move at the time. I was 24 years old and quite a few pounds lighter, as you can see. Here's what I like about this car, and here's what I love about this particular body. It was made in a way that cars aren't made anymore, and it brings home the fact that it's sculpture as much as car design to me. I really think cars are a form of sculpture, but especially a car like this, where you don't see any seams as you do in new cars or even in a new Porsche 911. But in this car, there's lead. It's leaded in a way that probably wouldn't be legal these days. It would not be good for the workers, but you see just a flow of metal as in a piece of sculpture.
And now for the good and bad news. The good news is that Dan has a new house. The bad news, the 356 is up for sale.
I remember Jackie Stewart when he was a bit of a hero of mine. I remember reading in his book that how he had to trade in his bicycle to get his first shotgun for skeet shooting. And the lesson he learned was that you have to let everything go at some point to get something else. And maybe I'm only learning that lesson now.
You know, sport utility vehicle owners are always being criticized, and sometimes by us, for not taking their vehicle off-road. I mean, that's what it was built to do. The number one excuse, of course, is, I don't want to scratch my brand new car, and it's hard to argue with that. But look at this new Grand Vitara. Look at all those scratches, my goodness. But with today's new metallic paints, it's really just a couple of layers of dust. So you got to find a new excuse. All right, now let's head to the garage and join Bill Gardner.
Brad, one area where cars have really changed radically in the last 10 years or so is the method by which the fan belts are tensioned. Now, if you remember cars up until about the mid-80s, they typically all had some sort of a V-belt, and in many cases a multiple V-belts, 3, sometimes 4 V-belts driving all the accessories. There'd typically be one that was driving the water pump and power steering pump, one that drove the alternator, another one that drove the air conditioning if the car was so equipped, and sometimes another one that would drive the air pump or smog pump. Now, around the mid-80s, the engineers went to a different type of system, what we call serpentine belt, one belt that drove all the accessories from both sides of the belt. And along with the serpentine belts, they came out with an automatic belt tensioner. It was a spring-loaded tensioner to automatically tension the slack side of the belt. Now this system's worked pretty well. It's been on cars for around 10 years or so. You have very few problems with them, but when you do have problems, here's a typical example of what can go wrong. This 89 Chev Beretta that we've got here has a seized tensioner. Let's get a little bit closer look at what kinds of things can go wrong with it. With our coolant reservoir moved out of the way, we can get a better look at the belt-driven accessories. Down there is the tensioner that we're talking about, mounted to the front of the engine. And when I grab a hold of this serpentine belt and push or pull firmly on this belt, the tensioner should swing back and forth to accommodate that. Now in this case, the tensioner is somewhat seized or stuck, and it will move if I pry on it with a wrench, and that's the way that you normally unload the tension. You'd stick a wrench or a Johnson bar on the end of this thing and pull it back. Now if I pull it back far enough, it'll come back, but then it just sticks in that position, and right now it should have snapped back. The spring should have snapped it back tight and tensioned the belt. As you can see, it's stuck in the released position. Now I can take the belt off and replace any one of these components that I want to, and specifically on this car we've got to replace the water pump, but the dilemma I'll have is the belt tensioner won't swing back to where it should be. Now when you get a car like this, typically what you're going to have is shortened life of the bearings in the water pump, power steering pump, and alternator. And this car has a new alternator. I kind of wonder if this was a factor. We've got a failed water pump now, so we've got to deal with this and probably replace the water pump and the tensioner to fix it right. All right, we've moved to a different vehicle just to show you what a properly functioning belt tensioner should look like. There's our belt tensioner right there. The spring that tensions is right inside this housing here. And I'll let go of the rad hose, and when I pull on the serpentine belt on this vehicle, you can see that the belt tensioner is working in the normal fashion. That's exactly what it should do. Now, as a safety precaution, before you make a test like this, make sure that you've removed the keys from the ignition of the vehicle, or if the vehicle's equipped with a remote starter, you should remove at least one of the battery cables. As a matter of fact, probably a good precaution in any case is to remove one of the battery cables. That way you know there's no possible way the thing can get cranked over while you're working in this dangerous area. Now, periodic inspection of this is all that's necessary. Probably once a year would be sufficient, and or any time that one of the bearings in those belt-driven accessories fails, because there's a real good chance the failure may have been induced by a problem with that belt tensioner. If you've got a problem like we showed you on the Beretta, you're going to have repeat bearing failures. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 99.
You know, a lot of people think that the solid lines painted in the middle of our highways are the revealed word of God herself. Well, we went to a police station to check this out. The receptionist said, "You cannot cross a solid line. It's illegal." Well, frankly, I thought it was too. But the duty sergeant looked it up in the Highway Traffic Act, and guess what? There's nothing in there about solid lines at all. Oh, you can't pass on a hill or on a curve or within 30 meters of a bridge or a railway track, but on a clear, straight, wide open road like this, it's up to you. Now, I've driven with people that think that solid lines are divinely inspired. Maybe they're on a winding road, gentle turns that you can still see till next Tuesday, but if the line is solid, they won't cross it. They drive like they're in a slot car, just because otherwise they think they're breaking the law. All they're doing is making their passengers seasick. Now, I'm not telling you that you should go out and cross solid lines, but I've got no problem with cutting a corner if it makes things easier, provided you can see what you're doing. Because after all, it's your vision and your judgment that are at stake here. Are you going to trust yourself or some line-painting truck driver who maybe just forgot to turn the switch off 4 years ago? Besides, if a cop does pull you over, at least in Ontario, you've got the law on your side. And by the way, it's not illegal to stand on a solid line when a truck goes by. It's just stupid. I'm Jim Kenzie.
So the off-roading is continuing out here in the Rocky Mountains in British Columbia. And what's the verdict with the Grand Vitara? Well, one journalist told me he felt that Suzuki has now leapfrogged in front of the competition. You know, after spending a day on and off-road, I would tend to agree. And if there is a tiebreaker, it has to be the V6. But stay tuned, because on a future program, you know who will be taking a much closer look on test drive. That, of course, is Graham Fletcher. That's it for now. We'll see you next week as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
The new Sonata definitely puts us on the map where we want to be, and that's now a quality vehicle that we can compete with the competition, not on price any longer, but in quality and performance.
TSN's Motoring 99 has been brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them, and Midas Car Care, the way it should be.